Welcome to the Human Odyssey, the podcast about human-centered design. The way humans learn, behave, and perform is a science, and having a better understanding of this can help improve your business, your work, and your life. This program is presented by Sophic Synergistics, the experts in human-centered design. So, let's get started on today's Human Odyssey.
Hello, and welcome to the Human Odyssey podcast. I'm Rachel Staats, and I'm joined with Brittany Walton.
Hey, Rachel. How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing good. Not too bad for a Monday.
Lisa Calkins.
Hello, happy to be here.
Happy to see you. And last but certainly not least, Cynthia Rando.
Hey everyone, happy Monday.
So today we're going to be talking about safety and how it can affect your everyday life to working experiences and how human factors can help prevent this or make it better. I wanted to first open it up to the room to see if anyone had like an everyday experience with safety, a safety issue.
So I think that's generically a good question to ask, but I would advocate for backing up a little bit and, talking a little bit about what do we think safety means? Safety is one of these, ubiquitous terms that gets thrown around for almost everything and anything under the sun. And I'm not sure, in context wise, we all carry around the same universal meaning of what safety means to us. And I think that's really paramount when we think about human-centered design and where there's missing considerations from a safety perspective. What do y'all think?
Yeah, that's a very good definition, because you can think of safety and human factors and human-centered design as the same, two sides of the same coin, in some way.
I would say it's also our number one gap when we talk to, clients or industry about, what is safety. The number one gap in understanding is that the human factors, purview really pertains to the safety element as well. Like that's not always understood. So we make that connection a lot. And then, you kind of see that light bulb go off of, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's just not inherently understood.
I think that's a good point. It leads to another thing that I think a lot of people in industry don't necessarily understand with safety. And that's, I think it's just really considered that when an incident happens that, it wasn't unsafe, but safety deals with a lot more than just making sure accidents don't happen. It's really about, your plan and process in your everyday work.
Yeah, and safety doesn't necessarily mean the actual accident or the event that occurs, right? And so, it's, sometimes I think we make it look easy. So when really bad events happen, we don't quite understand the complexity behind the event itself. And, thinking big picture and understanding, how human beings have to live and navigate their world and how they have to understand things gives us an incredible opportunity as, human-centered design specialists to bring that understanding to bear in the things that we design for people to use. And it's more than, is someone enjoying the product experience, right? So much more. And I think that's where we get hung up on and where we fail to really hit the mark as designers when we don't appreciate how those two need to go together for a good experience, right? If it's safe, you're naturally having good outcomes when you use something, you're going to have a positive user experience. And for me, I think that's the key conversation I don't hear enough about.
Yeah. Can you expound on that and give your definition of safety from that?
So, when I have to do it in context of human-centered design because I don't view them as different. And so when we talk about human-centered design in the field of human factors, I think what is not well defined is the fact that human factors is a human safety discipline. In fact, we are the only true human safety discipline by the book. right? So when we think about the human and what we're charged to do as human factors experts, we're charged to make sure that we protect the human at all costs through the design process or in the operations that we define and the procedures that we create and the expectations that we put on the human being, as well as optimize their performance, right? And so those two go hand in hand. If you're safe, you can perform pretty well, and you're going to expect good outcomes. And I think where we get lost a little bit is the traditional understanding, or what seems to prevail as the universal thought about safety, is it has much more to do with system safety. And when you think of system safety, we think about tolerances and redundancies. How do we design it in so the system can't fail? But we forget that it's not just about the system failing, it's how can the system fail the human that can cause unsafe circumstances. And that's where the critical link, I think, in how we think and teach and talk about safety lies.
Yeah. With that definition in mind, do you think we can, guys want to go into more of a discussion of examples of this in your everyday life?
I think what Cynthia was saying about, making sure you're designing to the human and not requiring the human to adapt to that is, kind of a good segue into a common issue that I think a lot of us maybe have had as far as operating our stoves. I know myself have thought I had turned on a particular knob and realized that I had, either thought I was cooking for a long time and was not, or I had turned on a knob where maybe there was once a piece of plastic nearby and melted. And so, really making sure that the design fits what the human expectations are and what, their mental models I think are really important part of safety.
Yeah, and the operational environment too, because piggybacking off of that example, in my stove setup, I've got the controls like right at the front, like where your waste would, come to when you're, at the stove. And it's a flat top, like a flat burners, whatever the glass like stove top is. So when it's not on, you just naturally use that surface for, unloading groceries or doing other operations. And, that having the controls right there, I've bumped them before, and thankfully it's never been unintentionally turned on when something has been on the stovetop that's not meant to be heated. But that could very easily turn into a situation where that is the case, and then you've got a potentially bad situation.
Like the accidentally turning on and exploding a ceramic because it happened to be on the other burner because you're
Yeah, lots of potential for bad outcomes there. So say the human safety, in relation to all these different things, it's really on a spectrum too, depending on what we're talking about. This is applicable, in what we do, day to day, working with certain clients, all the way to a catastrophic level. But when we talk about instances of human safety, it's not always that extreme, but you can have compounding things that make it errors that would turn into a more hazardous environment. So it's understanding all of the different elements at their different levels and being able to mitigate so that you don't have those compounding effects as well.
And I think, what all these different events that we experience on the daily at a low level that we're capable of adapting and overcoming, usually, sometimes the consequences, aren't desirable. Like we melt a piece of plastic and good luck getting that off your burner if you got some old school burners. But you think about like what had to happen in the design process, to get to a point where you create a circumstance where somebody frequently makes an error of omission or commission, depending on how you look at it. And another good example, this happens in my car because it has newer technology. I've got a braking system, an automatic braking system, for when cars in front of me pull a fast one, and maybe I'm not, or the system thinks I'm not fast enough as a human being to detect. But unfortunately, the technology is only so good in terms of how it's capable of keeping up what the human is capable of keeping up with. And so we can pay attention to cars as we know that they're going to start merging and take the off ramp, and they may be slowing down, and we recognize that. But pace wise, we know they're going to be out of our way. Well, the system doesn't know that. So I can't tell you how many times I almost got into a rear end collision because my braking system decided it was smarter than me and slammed on the brakes, and then I get slammed against my steering wheel. Eventually, that's where we have circumstances where the designers didn't quite effectively characterize these operational scenarios to where it could actually put that human being in a much more unsafe posture than had that technology not existed, because we are far better at regulating that, human perception wise, than the system technology is. And so these are the critical issues that come into play when you're designing everyday use items for people that have various backgrounds and experiences and abilities. You have to consider these things in the design process, and how these products are going to get used and how people will react to them once they're implemented into the market.
On a similar note, in my car, it's not as serious as your experiences in your car, but it has a blindside blinker. But it likes to go off when I'm turning. I'm like, yes, there's a car there. I'm turning. And it overwarns, and that can lead to over feedback, and people tend to, and then you would just ignore that feedback, which is also dangerous to the user.
Yeah, and what do we call that? We call it desensitization, right? So this is another huge problem in the world of human factors and safety, is the misuse and overuse of cautions and warnings. We get to a point where, as people, we stop paying attention to them, not because we want to be bad human beings and we want to be unsafe. It's just that the multitude of times they don't play out to warn us against something that effectively causes us to be in a safer posture. So our belief system is now changed, that we don't trust the technology, right? So these are all consequences of when we don't design things, to fit the human use scenario.
Yeah, like that one time, that car that decided to go straight instead of turn, it'll T-bone me because I ignored my system.
Right. And that's the circumstance. It's not just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't. But the problem is the use and the experience of the technology builds you to the alternative, that it's a false risk for you.
Cars are love to think they're smarter than you, and also GPSs. So like, yes, thank you. I am turning. I am in the turn lane. Thank you for telling me for the umpteenth time.
And you definitely get used to certain features as well. And, thinking about how cars, aren't standard across the board. And so when, you're in a rental car, you're in, a spouse's car, someone else's car, you tend to rely on certain, features that you have that aren't universal across the board. And so, it's that kind of holistic thinking about, what technology is, really serving us in the grand scheme of things. And then what areas or what gaps of, safety do we have for the users across the board? So just something to think about too.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, because, even when we think about the design process and we think about complex environments or complex systems, our challenge as, human-centered design experts is knowing when to automate and knowing when not to, when the risk outweighs the benefit for the human being. And so that's always at odds when we're making decisions. Just because you have the technology doesn't mean you should use it. And unfortunately, the society as it is, we have a love affair with technology despite the use of it. But, we're now starting to see the negative consequences of so much technology in our everyday life. We're becoming less and less able to act human, right? And so, that's a whole other segment. I think, you think about documentaries like The Social Dilemma when we use social media platforms and the impacts on our behavior. But it's true when you think about like the systems that we're building to support, and, cars are going to continue to evolve, not to kick this subject to death, but we're on the path to the Jetsons, where we're trying to get to automated vehicles, and potentially maybe one day they're going to be flying. And all of these scenarios requires an understanding of what is the human role in these operations. It's you cannot expect the human being able to make those jumps, because the mental model or the operational model for that human being is no longer the same. And so their expectations and their behavior is going to warrant a different supporting system design to make sure that we do the right thing and we don't do the unsafe thing, because we don't understand what's going on with the technology.
Well, and to that point, like, safety is relevant. Like, when you're driving, the safe thing is to go with the crowd versus following the rules, which a computer will follow the rules. Um, and I think there's there's a discussion about the fundamental difference between robotics and humans, and the humans' ability to infer and do things with their mind, which robots tend not to.
Yeah,
I
it's
think one
having
thing,
the sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think, some of these conversations they're making me think of, when you're designing systems overall, and sometimes designers aren't necessarily thinking of the workload that the humans may have and how that can impact safety when you're requiring the human to do all these different tasks. And then, that also led me to think about, I just totally blanked.
I think what you're getting at, Lisa, it's all those intangibles too, that as human factors experts and specialists, like, we come in and have an understanding of that you wouldn't necessarily think about, the intangibles of workload or situational awareness. I know it's a really big one as well, in certain domains, is, and everyone wants like a number. How do you quantify that? How do we know, what's the acceptable number for situational awareness? And you just really can't provide that unless you get into the nitty gritty of the operations and the details and who your user base is and all of these things that contribute to what is acceptable and, what is not.
Thank you, Brittany. You helped me remember what I was going to say.
Great.
It was not related to what you said, but I appreciate what you said too. So when you are considering, all the different type of automations that you can have in a system, or, hardware, or whatever it may be, I think, ensuring that those can also be made manual. So like in the case with your car, you can turn off the automatic braking, or you can turn off the things that, maybe are not functioning as you need them. So you are also giving the user more control of that system. So you can automate when you need to essentially reduce workload, and then also allow that user that control to manually do the tasks when they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're hinting at a lot of things. A lot of folks underappreciate and are underwhelmed by the role of human-centered design and human factors, because they don't quite understand the impact when it's not there. And unfortunately, when we're not there, bad things happen, and then the consequences become deafening in a lot of respects. And so our role is extremely complicated, because we're dealing with something that is very dynamic and ever changing. As the system changes, as the ops change, as the environment changes, so does the behavior of the human. And so we have to understand all of that, from start to finish. Does this person start the job fatigued? Does this person have other stressors that we have to consider that would, to your point, cause extra workload, to where this is not as simple of a task as we estimate it to be, because they bring in other burdens to bear from another part of their job? And so, the equation is quite long and extensive, and that's why it's not so simple as giving the human an automated function. You've really got to understand the context of use, and what could they be bringing to bear that you're not prepared for as a designer. It's not all let's make the people shiny happy people. That's great, but that's not the real intent of the outcome that we're looking for.
Yeah, and that kind of segues into something I was thinking about. You can have the perfect employee and still have an accident at work, due to the design not assisting the human to warn them or help them in a situation that could prevent this accident.
Right, and all too often, right, we blame the person, and this is evident in how we classify outcomes, right? Human error. we see this more often than not as a justified end outcome to a negative event or a safety incident. And what happens? Well, we've quarantined it to poor Joe Smith who had a bad day in an accident. We don't care to ask why. We don't want to know how this happened because that raises more questions we can't answer and we can't solve and makes it difficult and costs us money. So it's way more easier for us to blame Joe Smith because now we've taken swift action, we've solved a problem, and we've shown everybody we've done something. Forget the fact that it's the wrong something and we haven't solved anything, and we've only made matters worse for Joe Smith and everybody else that might come after Joe Smith that might have the same accident. And so this is a cultural issue as well as understanding the cost of human error when you don't ask those questions from a business case. So, organizations are just as much to blame for this lust for swift action when we fail to understand that problems are hard and it takes a little bit more work to solve them adequately in the name of safety.
Yeah. Not to mention, you're opening up, like, from a company perspective, you're opening up lawsuits because of this and other aspects that human factors will look into.
Well, you're at risk of it, right? Whenever
Yeah.
anybody gets hurt on the premises or like product liability, if it's a product you're producing and you put out there, and if you haven't done your homework, let's forget for a minute. Your goal is not to avoid lawsuits, right? Your goal is to do the right thing and keep people safe. However, when you do the wrong thing, now you're measuring and your yardstick becomes lawsuits because that's the thing that's going to come back and be a pain point for you if you didn't do the right things in the design process, or from a company standpoint you weren't paying attention to those red flags. It all costs money, and unfortunately that's the language we speak in the world that we live in today. And again, it all comes back to the word safety, but safety has dollars attached to it. And that's the discussion as human beings that we have to understand is everything's a business. And so how do we motivate folks to understand that incorporating good human-centered design, even though it costs money up front, is part of the business to buy down the risk and buy down the cost later and keep profits up and keep people in a good place? Those should be like the benefits that we try to obtain.
Yeah, it was really well said. Did anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, really good discussion, and it shows the full, we like to say 360-degree scope of, what it is that Human Factors does, and in particular, like what we do as a company, and looking at products throughout the life cycle of their use. So good discussion there.
Yeah, it's caring about the human, but it's also caring about the ecosystem, right? We all have a goal, we all have an objective. Let's make sure they're in alignment so they all work seamlessly together, to achieve the right ends in the name of safety.
And I will say, as another kind of value statement or value case, from our experience in working with clients, once you get involved with a project or a program, whatever it is, and you show that value, and again, to kind of go back to that light bulb moment of like people end up getting it, and then the support never goes away. It's never like, okay, well, we tried that, it wasn't really, I don't think we need it. That has never been the case. It's always an understanding of what the value that Human Factors brings, all the things that we look at that, no other domain is really, responsible for. And, that's okay. That's, why we're here. And that's what, Human Factors does. But, it's never the case where it's like, we tried it out, not really for us. It's 100% case that, this is value added.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, do we have any other like examples we want to provide as far as like daily life, human safety examples, or like professionally?
So, I would change the question a little bit, for the audience who's listening, trying to follow along and to think, whenever you have an experience where you're like, oh, I can't believe I did that, or I did it again. I keep making the same mistake. Doors are always a famous example. I hate it because it's always used, but like whenever you push a door and you should have pulled it, but the design of the door told you to push it, that's a classic bad design. But thinking about things in your everyday life where you get annoyed, that's usually a sign that something is amiss with your expectations as an end user. Once upon a time, we had a submission. So we have like a little bit of a series online that we haven't been keeping up as of late, but it was quite popular for a while when bad designs happened to good people. Where the audience would submit, examples and run-ins with this from their everyday walks of life. And, just the amount of bathroom mishaps, is just egregious to me, because it's one of the most fundamental things that we need as human beings. And the amount of like bad designs, especially in airports are notorious for this, but, just being able to physically get in and out of the stalls with your luggage, you think that would be an obvious with people in the airport, but it seems to be an afterthought in the designs of these stalls, or they just think everybody's a size 0 and eats nothing for breakfast. I don't know, but like I can't even tell you how many times I've gotten stuck or smashed against like one of the side to try to get out with my luggage. And
Yeah, it's frustrating.
yeah, and it's just amazing. For those of you who travel all the time, I know you're like saying yes, yes, yes. But I could go on and on to like some of these things that have gone on. Putting soap dispensers over an outlet. Who thought that was safe? Like, not only are you getting the water from your hands on the electrical outlet, what about all the soap that's coming out of that dispenser that people don't like wait for, or misfires? Just simple things that we just tend to overlook, because we didn't think through the operation that humans were gonna do in that area. I don't know, maybe that's triggered some more ideas from you all, but like bathrooms are like my nemesis.
Well, actually, recently, one of the airports had the bright idea of putting windows, fully see-through windows, by the way, in the bathroom that is visible from the tarmac.
Oh, that's
That's a new
enlightening.
one.
Luckily, a pilot informed them that they could fully see the bathroom through the window. So
Oh
hopefully
boy.
that gets changed. I believe everyone just assumed it was a mirrored one-way window. Um,
Wow.
Maybe that's a future upgrade. I don't know.
yeah, I believe that's a slightly different. It's not safety as in privacy versus safety as in bodily harm, but
Yeah, right.
But I bet somebody was trying to improve the lighting in there, and that was their way of doing it without thinking about the consequences. So the big C word is consequences. What are the consequences, both positive and negative, about the things that you're about to do design wise or change? How does that impact, and what could go wrong? I always ask my engineers, tell me all the ways you can break this or cause a bad outcome. And when we get to I can't think of anything more, then we're doing pretty good.
Going back to the door example, it turns out there's a third option. And Lisa, I think you got the pleasure of being there for this one. But last time I was in Houston, we went out to dinner with a couple of people from the team. And anyways, as we were going to leave, there's a pretty big like double door leaving the restaurant, and it's just got like the pretty standard like handle on it, but they're actually sliding doors. And pushed, pulled was neither of the two. Turns out you can also slide with handles that look like it is not intended for that operation. So
and
watch out.
there's also the fourth option where there is no handle, so you just walk into the door because you think it's an automatic door.
Let's hope that doesn't happen. That hurts.
I've done it once at a Staples because I couldn't tell where the door was because it was all the same. I was very smart that day.
Oh no. I did have an interesting bathroom experience that, not directly safety related, but it was the faucet, the soap, and the like air dryer were all connected in a U shape. And I put my hand in the middle and water came out. So I was like, okay, where's the soap? And I put my hand to the next one where I thought the soap was, and it was the dryer, which then splattered the water all over my face. So yeah, even though the symbols, later looking at them more closely, I was like, oh, I guess that, yeah, that would be air. But I didn't, it took me getting water on my face to realize that.
But that's actually a good one. Symbols are not as universal as we like to think they are, and although there are accepted symbols for a lot of things, you can go to ISO, ANSI standards and find them. they don't always translate to people the way we think they do. And so always testing them, user testing, a big thing. Like when we implement really grand ideas, test it to see if it works. Test it to see how the people you think are going to use this and have no problem. And this doesn't mean, engineer Greg down the hall from you, who's also been part of the project and just is in love with this, this means bringing in people off the street who don't really care about your product and testing it and telling you how it is. It's called tough love, and it's going to give you the better design and the better product in the end.
And also,
yeah, exactly. And when companies do this right, you see them have a really committed user base, that love their products. And Dyson comes to mind. I have several of their products that I just love whatever interface it is. Obviously Apple's really good at understanding who their user base is, and so there's definitely a payout and a benefit to getting it right.
Also, what I was going to say is, when I was thinking of bathrooms, there's different cultures. Like the disabled community is going to be different from the able-bodied community, and how they use the item and how they interpret the use of the item. So it might be not as safe for somebody who has a disability, and that should be accounted for.
We were thinking along very similar lines, Rachel, when Cynthia was talking about, your user population. I also thought of, culturally, people can have very different ideas of what symbols mean. So when you are doing that testing to determine if your end user can understand, it's really important that you capture, all the different types of users that may interface with your system.
Yeah, and understanding ecosystem of use and understanding when your users will come along with you when you make changes and when it won't. And so going back to what Brittany was saying with the Apple products, although they're good and they understand the ecosystem of use, I didn't change my iPhone with every generation. So that's a fallacy or of an expectation of the user demographic that iPhone doesn't quite get. And maybe they get it, but they don't care. I don't know. But I made a huge jump. I forget if I got to like 12. I don't even know where we are in the series. That's how, out of touch I am. So sorry, Apple. Sorry, Apple. But when they lost the button home screen and then went to like the slide and only this, do you want to see the nightmare? I wish there had been a camera in my house with me trying to figure out how to use my phone again. It was like I had never used an iPhone in my entire life. Like I wanted to break the damn thing, excuse my language. And then I wanted to go back to a flip phone because I was just getting disgusted with the fact that I couldn't do a simple operation that was a no-brainer before. And again, these are just super simple things that you have multiple generations using your products. They're going to progress with you in different ways. And it's not going to be linear because people don't necessarily have the money or the tech lust to keep up with the Joneses. And you've got to understand that as a product designer. And there is attrition, and sometimes you don't want to take certain users with you, and that's fine too. But you've got to understand like the challenges, for even mildly adept people. I use technology all the time. I could not figure out why I could not use my phone.
Mine was slightly different. I jumped to Samsung, and I was like, I don't know how to restart this phone. I had to Google how to restart my phone because it was super weird of press the down volume button and the home button at the same time. I'm like, that's not okay.
What did we do before Google? The grand old Google.
I think it's ask your father or mother or parent.
Yeah, there's no use in this category of tech. No.
My brother had a very similar reaction with iPhones when they got rid of the headphone insert. That he basically told me he was refusing to get another iPhone until they put it back. And I was like, well, good luck with that.
Hold your breath. But, I think we've highlighted lots of great everyday examples and seemingly small challenges that cost us time and money, right? And aggravation or love or hate of products. And so we could have loved something just fine. But as things progress and you can't see yourself in the product, or it doesn't match how you want to interact with the product. And, the Microsoft Office suite is another example. The rate of change with the Microsoft products is, continuous and ongoing. And, whenever things would move or they'd change widgets, like I would have a dastardly time, like keeping up with, okay, now where do I find my watermark? I got to Google it because I don't know where it is anymore. And like, these are just yes, they're learning curves, but were they necessary? And so, these are questions that you have to ask yourself. Do you change things for the sake of changing things? Or can you take advantage of what people already know and design those innately into your system while still getting to that new fancy tech, but not leaving your users on the dock, so to speak, and taking off with the water skis and just dragging them along?
Yeah.
Sorry, Rachel. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, with me personally, for Microsoft updates, I have to wait a year before I trust it to be usable, in a sense.
Oh yeah, I don't update any software update right away.
Yeah.
I think some companies or platforms are, getting smarter to that, in that, after you have an update, it'll kind of guide you through a really quick, like high level, these were the updates since, the last version of whatever it is. And, I know that's been helpful to kind of see where some new features are. And so I think that's maybe the happy medium with wanting to implement new things, but needing to, inform people of, what it is so that they're not just left looking for it.
Yeah. And so, I think we're kind of coming up on time here, but to think about this full circle, what is the point of all the storytelling and the commiserating, right? Well, what are we trying to say? We're trying to, shed light on the fact that, to do design and to do it well and to keep the evolution of things moving forward, you've got to bring the user along with you. And to do that, you've got to understand their objectives in using your technology. Why are they going to use it in the first place? How are they going to use it? And what are their expectations of use when they start using it, and how this fits in and apply to them? And you need to accommodate that through the design process. And it's not an easy thing. Like, just because you're a designer doesn't mean you have all this knowledge. You almost never do, because you're the designer. You're biased. You don't represent your end user. And so, if that's not enough motivation for you, think about the consequences. What happens when someone hurts themselves? Let's talk about you being a startup. You've got one chance to market. You can't afford anybody getting hurt, and you certainly can't afford the lawsuit that's going to come after it, right? So these are critical things to start safeguarding your company and your product to make sure you are the best at what you do.
Yeah, that was perfectly said. As you said, Cynthia, we're coming up on time. So if anyone wants to wrap up with any other final thoughts, this would be the time.
Yeah, it's been a good discussion of kind of the spectrum of safety. So I've enjoyed it.
All right. With that, I will say thank you for joining me. And this has been episode 7 of the Human Odyssey podcast, a human-centered design podcast. Our podcast is available online at sophicsynergistics.com/podcast, and it's available to stream on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play Podcasts, and YouTube. Be sure to check our social media platforms for more human-centered content.
Thanks, everyone.
The Human Odyssey is presented by Sophic Synergistics, the experts in human-centered design. Find out more at sophicsynergistics.com. Get smart. Get Sophic smart.